coming in from Los Angeles. And Annette's coming in from Berlin. We were together at 6 a.m. this morning.
Well, powerful, infuriating, important. I'm so glad we all got to experience it. And I'd like to start with Phyllis and ask maybe what is a bit of an elephant in the room question. You are a white, cisgendered woman.
No.
From the Western world. How did you end up telling this story?
Well, so I didn't retire from sport. I quit, and I quit abruptly. Long story. And I went on in my life in filmmaking. So I ended up as a filmmaker, and a really smart person who I didn't listen to said, you can't affect change from the outside. So don't quit. And it was actually Iona Campanola. And I said, well, I'm smart, I'm 21, I know everything or whatever, and I quit. And I learned very quickly that you can be right and you can be dead right, and also that you can't affect change from the outside. So I waited 1,000 years, and my very dear friend and mentor, Dr. Bruce Kidd, and I had followed Castor's story with so disturbed, and Bruce introduced me to the wonderful and my dear friend, Dr. Payoshni Mitra. And sometimes films start talking back to you, and Payoshni and I talked a lot, and we had a chance to get to know each other, and through our relationship and relationship with other people in the film, she introduced me to the athletes. And then, I was way in. In fact, I was so in, I had no way out. So to be back to, me being a white cisgender filmmaker, making a film and following the stories of these extraordinary women from the global South, well, I had to ask myself that a lot of questions. A lot of stuff was going down when I was in the middle of making it, and it became such a, a huge conversation. And with Payoshni's guidance and lots of conversation, I really leaned heavily into allyship and standing in solidarity. And, having experienced sexual assault myself as an athlete, and physical and emotional abuse, but my experience pales to what these women experience. And when I met Annette in Germany, and she'd only been there a couple of days, and I thought, I have a responsibility. It's no more the responsibility of a filmmaker, it's responsibility of the human being. So that's why.
Thank you for sharing that. And Annette? Annette, thank you so much for being here with us. I realize it's so early for you over there, but can you please tell us why you so bravely, kindly, generously spoke to Phyllis for this documentary?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think the reason being is that I think it was the way to where the message will be coming to be spread out to other people, to other young upcoming athletes who are there, hidden, not having the guts of coming out, talking about what the challenges they are facing behind there, whereby nobody knows what they are going through. So through me becoming their whistleblower and also being an athlete who has experienced and who has been harmed by the rules of IAAF and regulation about DSD athletes. So that's the reason being.
Were you happy with the final product?
Yeah, I'm very, very happy that I'm doing a great job, because the more I talk about this issue, the more the spread of the message is going very far, far away, even where other places where where I'm not, I am. So really, I'm just very proud of that.
All right, thank you very much. And by the way, I'm just going to say this to everybody. I'm not here to hog the microphone, so please jump in as you feel fit. You too, Dr. Mitra, anytime. But right now, I would like to ask Karen Dougherty something. We saw an awful lot of brave women in this film and an awful lot of trauma. And I would like to ask, Karen, do female athletes in particular, do they experience trauma differently in sport than perhaps the rest of us may over the course of our lives in the general population? Is there something specific about sport? And let's face it, we're talking about women, male-dominated, power at the top of federations and international federations. So what is it women, and generally young women in sport, experience as trauma? Is it different?
Well, it's more plentiful, I would say. So
how so?
There's more trauma in being. It's International Women's Day. We know it's traumatic for people just to be female in this world, to be in a female body, because already women are thought of as less than, even here, but all around the world. And so when you're a female athlete, already you're less than. You're not flying in. You're flying in coach. We know this, right? Already there's less money. Female bodies are less than male bodies. And you're also in pain a lot. So you're witnessing a lot of actual physical pain and experiencing it and playing through the pain. Phyllis, hurt her shoulder 3 weeks ago. No one else could have done what she did in the last 3 weeks. She was no, but it makes you were an athlete. You know how to do it, right? You know how to play through the pain. And so when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about suffering. And we're talking about being helpless. And I think, so female athletes, all athletes, when they're done, when they're finished as athletes, they're just spat back out into the world. They've been told what to do. They're just bodies. Their minds they're not thought of as having subjectivity, of having a mind, of having experience. And so they're treated as objects. So I think, yes.
But in particular to this film, the women here have been absolutely savaged.
Yes.
And that is a trauma that almost no one on this planet as an athlete will ever experience.
Well, because they've had their very identity sort of riven from them as well. Do you know, it's enough that it's I don't know about you guys, but the first time I saw this film in a theater, my body was coursing with rage. I don't know if that's what many of you experienced. So that's just us experiencing these stories for 80 minutes. Imagine sort of living that reality and having your very livelihood, your identity stolen from you on top of everything else. Yeah.
Does anybody else here want to weigh in on trauma? This is Dr. Fusco, by the way.
I think that, I think what's really important for us to think about here is the racialized violence that these women's bodies were subjected to. And I wanted to thank all the athletes, and it's a privilege to be here with Annet and Dr. Mitra. that organizations like the IAAF and the IOC, acting as Castor pointed out, to protect certain bodies and not others, makes me think of various theoretical things that I read every day with my graduate students. And there's a theorist called Nirmal Puwar who talks about Black bodies as being space invaders, and that there are bodies who can occupy certain spaces without question and others who cannot. And I was thinking about the change of events for certain athletes, and how there are certain events like middle distance running, we've seen it in tennis, where certain bodies are not supposed to belong. And what we do then is force athletes into events that, like the 100, the 200, that are seen as natural speed is acceptable there. Whereas other events have to be protected for certain kinds of bodies, white bodies. And we saw that from the two athletes who cried and complained that women's sport would change if some of these athletes would have their way. And I think that, there are certain, as I said, certain kinds of bodies that are seen as being able to be protected in certain spaces while others can't.
Ali Greey?
Yeah, and even how we define sex. We talk about the category woman as if it's this, as if we share a common understanding, but, is it external genitalia? Is it internal genitalia? Is it secondary sex characteristics? Is it chromosomes? Is it hormones? And it's what we've seen on the film is the, I'm going to call it World Athletics, although it was the IAAF at the time. They're just hopping from one category to the other. And you know what? When you look at the demographics of humanity, of women, none of those occur on a binary. Not a single one. And it's, testosterone is such a tricky substance too, right? I mean, even within a single athlete, your testosterone changes depending on what time of day it is. It changes depending on which method you're using to measure it. But we talk about testosterone like it's this monolithic, predictable substance linked to, athletic performance, linked to masculinity, but scientists can't even figure it out. There's no empirical data, that is informing Annette's exclusion, as Dr. Mitra pointed out so many times in the film, but they don't care. And it's so frustrating. And I think this film also does such an excellent job of showing us how we can't talk about gender without talking about race. And Madeline Pape, or Maddie Pape, is a sports scholar. She actually competed against Castor in the semifinals, and at the time she was one of those white feminine athletes who was sniveling, right? But then she went to grad school, and she did she really changed her perspective on that to actually. I think she's an advocate for Castor now. And she went and interviewed those athletes, right? And you know what they said? They said, this is, I almost don't want to say it because it's so horrifically racist. But they said there's one of them in every athlete. There's one of them in every village. That's a direct quote from the participants. And it just shows how interwoven white supremacy, right, in the global north is to this singular understanding of gender and who is to be protected. And I thought the film did such an excellent job of really showing that and going beyond solidarity to accompliceship, right?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask a couple of quick questions, if I can, to Dr. Mitra.
Yes,
bring her in
please.
here. Dr. Mitra, just a couple of things here. If you can just bear with me. Duty Chan said something very, very interesting. She said, women must support women to make change here. But that's not really happening, is it?
It depends on how you see it. I'm seeing women supporting women here. I'm seeing Phyllis supporting me, I supporting, Duty, and it's supporting me in every new case of athlete that comes to me. So I'm seeing a lot of support here. And I also think this movie does talk about these women being savaged, but I also see a lot of resilience from among all these four women who were interviewed through the process of making this film. So I think it's about perspective as well.
Okay. Are we getting enough support from white female athletes?
Well, if you just read what some of certain media, houses like to write about, probably not, because I think the people who are against inclusion, their voices are quite loud, but the numbers are not. And that's a belief I have. I do not think the reverberations of this is like there is a history, and I was talking to Carol Oglesby, women's sport activist. She's been there for decades, and she talking about how in 1980s in North America, she saw how women athletes felt that the inclusion of lesbian women in sport was sort of causing similar kind of anxieties, and you see that now, but I think the noise is very loud in North America and certain parts of Europe. If you go to the global south, it's not the case. So it's again about which newspapers we are reading.
Okay. And Phyllis might want to jump in here to ask maybe Annette something if you want to, make a point. But I'd like to also ask Dr. Mitra. This is something maybe I just didn't understand, but when it comes to testing an athlete, a woman for high T, how does that happen? Does somebody just snitch her out and say, I don't like her? Are all women tested for high testosterone? I'm just trying to get an idea or get a handle on who is subjected to this set of tests that look like it's just done by in-house scientists and aren't really rigorously checked or vetted by independent science teams.
We were talking about this a couple of days back at the Athena Film Festival as well. And this question comes back to us quite often. What triggers investigation? And to, going by the examples we have, for example, in Annette's case, she ran a great race in Netherlands. Annette, correct me if I'm wrong, in Netherlands in May in 2012. And right after that, in a couple of weeks, by early June, she's been asked to go to France for investigation. So performance sort of triggers investigation. In some way, you can say that. I'll give you another example of Kelly Hodgkinson, English, an athlete, middle distance runner from the UK, a white woman athlete who did phenomenally well in a course of about 6-7 months between, the first time she started running international races and then world championships and the Olympics. But these questions were not raised. As far as I know, she was not asked to be investigated. So as it was pointed out in the film and in the discussion today, it's not only about performance, it's also about the color of your skin. And also appearance. And that day, Professor Rebecca Jordan-Young mentioned gestures sometimes probably trigger an investigation. So there are all these things we have noticed, but then the people who are probably starting these investigations are not in the room with you at this point. I think it would be good to hear from them.
I agree.
Well, also too, we were all sex tested. I was sex tested. I was called gender testing. What Judy was fem testing, femininity testing, with your fem card in the film. And then in 2000, well, see, when you're doped, right, you get a urine test. Well, people think that, you know, a urine test or a doping test is you get a little cup and you go into a private room and there's a curtain and you go do your thing and then you hand them a little cup of urine. Well, that's not what happens. You go into a room, it's, you know, breast down naked. You're sitting in front of someone, urinating in front of someone with someone no more than a few feet away from your body. And they're staring at your body, every bit of your body. So I'm being tested for seeing whether or not I'm taking anabolic steroids, and some human being that isn't barely qualified, you know, to be in a pharmacy buying Advil is looking at my body and deciding whether or not my body looks good enough for them to say, okay, we don't need to do any more testing on Phyllis. But if that person looking at me says, oh, geez, I don't know, to your point, thanks, Phyllis, off your urine goes, and then somebody like, you know what, you should really, I'm not sure, I don't, you know, you should do more tests. And that's another way that athletes, you know, some of the athletes that Payoshni has known, you know, went for a test and Santi Saja, and on the way home from her event, you're better to tell it than I am, what happened to her.
Go for it. Dr. Mitra, go for
Shanti
it.
Soundarajan. Sorry, Shanti Soundarajan was tested after she won that Asian Games silver medal. And yes, I mean, to add to what Phyllis is suggesting about anti-doping sort of tests and how they are connected to sex testing, it's quite sophisticated as of now. So if you look at articles by Medical Commission members historically, they do mention at some point when they drop routine sex testing, the argument was we already have the anti-doping tests and we can very well see if there is ambiguity anywhere and we can, catch the imposters. But we don't need to spend so much time to do routine sex testing of all these women. So the argument at that time was that the anti-doping process will anyway continue with the surveillance that was required. Now, if you come to the current situation, what you see is, for example, the anti-doping code of WADA from 2020, when a certain footnote was added to the WADA code saying samples taken for anti-doping purposes could be used for other regulations like DST regulations and transgender regulations. So this is now mentioned in the very code. So you see how sophisticated it has become. Now they can just use the samples collected to whatever tests they need. They just have put a footnote, and you see how WADA, who is supposed to be independent, works hand in hand with these international federations.
Dr. Fusco?
One of the things that lines in the film, which connects to what you're saying, Dr. Mitra, is the fact that the more this organization is critiqued, the more their faulty science is questioned, the uglier they get. And I'm thinking of former master student and now Dr. Cassandra Wells, who looks at the history of the sex verification tests and how resilient they are over the years. Each time they are questioned, each time they are critiqued, they slightly change what they are looking for, how they are testing. And, I think that that's an important thing to remember, is that these tests change depending on the questions that are asked of them. And it really speaks to what you're saying, Dr. Mitra, about now using this footnote, this ability to test for anything that is possible is important.
How is it possible that sport is not accountable? I don't know if this is actually on.
It's not.
Thank you. Sorry, I was going to ask Annette and Dr. Mitra if you could both weigh in. How is it accountable? Have you ever got it around your head? How is it they're not accountable at the IAAF for their science, for the harm they're causing? They're just a closed club that seems to not answer to anyone. And to your point, Dr. Mitra, they just sort of change the A, B, and C's of what they're doing to get around. I mean, I just don't understand why you can do that to people without having to have any repercussion.
Annet, do you want to go first? Or should I go first?
Okay, let me go first. Yeah, this is something which is really crucial, whereby that you're finding out that they are focusing on athletes from the Globe of the South, because now they're seeing that most of the athletes who have been competing very good are from the Globe of the South, which means they are bringing in discrimination and racism in the sport. And for them, I don't know how they think about that, how they think, because we are all humans. Yeah, but for them, I think they think even like as if they are not humans. Yeah.
I think for me, if I can add something to this, I think there is this notion of that sport governing bodies and the IOC push for the autonomy of sport, and therefore they somehow feel they have a license to do these things. So if you have to answer the question that you're asking, it's that sense of license that we can do anything because sport is autonomous, and the fight is between now if you think about it, with the United Nations OHCHR, Human Rights Council, have published a report where it's clearly recommended that state actors should intervene, national governments should intervene when athletes' rights are violated like this. And they should make sport governing bodies review, or revoke the regulations. So there are these kind of push from the human rights world. We've also worked on that report, the Human Rights Watch report on athletes with innate variations in sex characteristics. So I think it's that push that is now externally happening. So when you see the World Athletics, they made that comment, which I think I talk about in the film, that they're not bound by any human rights convention or principle because they are a private contractual body. From there, they have now moved on to creating a human rights strategy group, which published a report. At least there they acknowledged one thing, that the governing body has been prioritizing risk to the organization as opposed to risk to the individual. That's the only thing that they mention. Of course, it's an internal report that an internal working group worked on. But at least there is those kind of little sort of changes that you notice because of all the external, push that has occurred in the last few years. But they have to be accountable. What we also see in sport is a lot of interconnected. So even like I said, WADA is not independent, because the compliance committee of WADA at the time when this footnote was added to their code, the compliance committee of WADA was headed by Jonathan Taylor, the very legal counsel that World Athletics used for Dutee Chand's case as well as Castro Semenya's case. So how is it this independent and how is this fair? But these questions have not been asked traditionally, but now we are asking, and therefore I hope that there will be change. It's slow to come, but hopefully it will change.
Well, and Okay. And change seems to have to come from the injured parties, which is a hard thing. And you were talking about resilience earlier, and of course, athletes are kind of de facto resilient. That's they have to be. I think that, Phyllis, in part, you made this film to work through very traumatic things that happened to you, too, as a young woman, as a very young woman, and very vulnerable. And so it does fall to the people to whom the trauma was done to make the change. And Annette is a perfect example of someone who is doing that. She's using the terrible things that were done to her in order to try to make change for other women. So this doesn't happen to other women. But there are also women like Annette. And Annette, I want to ask you, how are you doing now? How are you doing now? We have a responsibility. Whose responsibility is it to help women like you, who everything was taken from, to heal, to move forward, to give you the strength that you need to help make the changes for other women? How are you now?
Yeah, like I'm doing good. Just that I'm getting the guts whereby that the moment I talk about this issue is the moment I feel my heart is at peace. And also the more I spread the message and the more so I talk about my experience, I think the message goes very far away to more younger women who are there athletes, who are hidden, who doesn't have even people to talk to. But when they find a message from me, who was part of who was harmed by the same people who also tried to harm them, I think they also feel like they're getting strength, even though they're not coming out to the media talk.
So your healing is in helping. That's how you're healing.
Yes, that's how I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also struck by how, as fans of track and field, we're all losing out. You know, we don't get to see Annette competing. We don't get to see Caster Semenya like brilliantly, beautifully competing. Can you imagine if Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps or LeBron James was interrupted in their peak years of competition? We're missing out on history that is never going to be made. It's devastating.
Well, we go right then to advantage. So what is fair play? What is a performance advantage? So Michael Phelps has a wingspan of 700 yards. So we're going to cut Michael Phelps' arms off because he has a performance advantage? Or you cut out Usain Bolt's fast twitch fibers, or cut off Taco's legs because he's too tall? And, it's really a performance advantage. So when we look at what is actually leveling the playing field, a level playing field is safe place, do no harm. And for women in the global south, and what I've learned through Annette and through Dr. Mitra and the other women in the film, is, a level, and Dr. Bruce Kidd, who talked to me about this in great detail, is food and income and taking care of your family and going to school and your livelihood and your life and the respect of your family and your community and your privacy, your personal medical privacy. That's a level playing field. So when you talk about these regulations, that's why they have to go. And I stand with you both and, proudly, as, my white privileged, lived experience, and whatever I can do to contribute, that's it. And it's just being here with you, and I've spent the day with both of you.
I wonder if we should be talking to the audience now. Maybe people have heard enough from us, and we can maybe jump in every now and then. Is that okay, Innis? And I believe Anya is here. Annet and Dr. Mitra, we are going to go to the audience now to ask the better questions. Right, everybody? And I thought we had a young athlete who was going to ask a question on behalf of, there she is. You just bear with us for a second. Anesi Anya is a U of T student and a sprinter, and she is going to ask a question. So go for it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for your film, and thank you, Dr. Mitra and Annet, for being here and speaking with us. I, as a sprinter and as a track and field fan and an athlete, this just enraged me. And even thinking back to 2016, I remember I was 16 during those Olympics, and I watched the 800 final and followed everything that ensued afterwards. And all of the medalists from that race were subject to this testing. I remember that. I remember seeing all of these things, the things that followed after, and other things that have happened within women in sport. So I think my question is, I guess, for Phyllis and Annet, Dr. Mitra, how do we encourage young women to continue in sport, even though time and time again, sport has shown that it isn't necessarily the safest space for young women? Yeah.
Dr. Mitra, would you like to answer first?
Okay. I mean, I played badminton myself, and I came to badminton in search of a safe space because, there is another sort of history to that, why I came to sport, thinking that it will be safe growing up in India. So I do understand, that question in some ways, because of my experience as a young athlete looking for that kind of safe space as well. It's related to what we were discussing before about what we are missing out. We are, you mentioned that we are missing out as fans, but it's also about young women who absolutely, admire Caster Semenya. We have other athletes like Francine Niyonsaba from Burundi, who's an UN ambassador, ambassador for young people. I think sort of connected to UNICEF, and there were lots of young kids. They look up to her in Burundi, Annet in Uganda, Margaret in Kenya. There are other athletes, but Caster is huge in Southern Africa. What message are we giving to these young girls and women who look up to Caster Semenya, for that matter? And this is a question that we don't hear Sebastian Coe asking, because if you look at the people who work on anti-doping, tell me how very, very professionally and very sort of, how often even these federations protect sort of well-known athletes, even when they're aware of some form of, the doping issues. So there is a whole sort of example of, big athletes, well-known athletes being protected. But we don't see that, because why do they do that? Probably because they want their names are connected to the reputation of the sport. They want, some form of, there are many fan following of these people, but why do we not see that in case of Caster Semenya? Is a question that we have always asked, and we have never found an answer. So yes, that's one of the other things that we do come across, and we do discuss. I've worked with Caster as well, and therefore there have been many occasions we discuss this, that what do those young kids who are in Maasai Athletic Club, for example, which Caster runs in Limpopo, what do those young girls feel? Do they feel safe in sport? And yes, it's this constant idea where fairness, our notion of fairness, is being prioritized over the notion, over the very important idea of safety, which is not fair.
Annette, do you want to jump in there too?
Okay. Also, I also not be far away from what Dr. Payoshni has said. I really like, I see it now. For example, like me and Caster Semenya, I think in South Africa, she's also doing a great job whereby she's in a same club with young, very many athletes, young upcoming ones, whereby I usually always watch their videos when they are doing their training, whereby that they also get more boost from her. And I think she gives them also lessons like giving them some information, teaching them like how you get preparation, also to bear with the challenges and the outcomes which will come, because athletics is it's a journey, like it's not like a straight path. So whereby it also she helps them, I think, like giving them like a right path and also giving them straight direction to help them also like as for those one who are like taking athletics as their career and also critiques, which can help them, I think, in their career.
I mean, sport is this like duplicitous place, you know. It was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. Period. It was extraordinary, monomaniacal, but extraordinary. I think the important thing, or by way of suggestion to all of us and to, you know, the powers that be, and if we can get the loud voice, is you can say no. No is a sentence. That's it. And the more empowered athletes are in you know, unifying in this particular story, and women athletes unifying in other forms of body trauma, and not being in fear that you're going to get cut from the team, or you're not going to play, or you know, that you're being heard, and that's sort of a woke word, but it's true. And so you can say no, and we all have to believe when an athlete's telling us that they're in trouble. So that's you know, it is a beautiful space, and it is and when we're in it, it's the most important thing in our lives, whether that's normal or abnormal. It's definitely true.
I think Dr. Mitra wanted to make one more point, maybe before you go back to the audience. So please, Dr. Mitra.
I just wanted to add something that Castor had said at the end of the 5-day long hearing we had in Lausanne, because she was asked by the judges to make a final comment. And she said at that time she was still not a mom. Now she's a mom to 2 beautiful children. And Castor at that time, I remember, said in those last remarks that when I have children, will I want them to join sports? I don't think so. And you know, I just wanted to add that here.
All right, thank you. That's a great point. I'd like to hear from somebody from the back, please. Yes, please stand up. Oh, maybe this gentleman first, and then this woman up here, lovely woman up here. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Just let whoever you're speaking to just address it, and then just let it rip.
Okay, fine. My question is for Phyllis and for Dr. Mitra. I want to know, are women, the question is, what are women being tested for testosterone levels in other sports, such as in team sports and other sports, as archery, rowing, MMA, weightlifting, gymnastics, and boxing? And what steps are those women taking to what are they doing to empower themselves so that they won't have to be tested for testosterone levels, just to make sure that they're not that their testosterone levels are normal or above normal within the parameters.
Did you hear that, Dr. Mitra?
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So if you think about other sports, and yes, I'm working in some other sports, and I have athletes from some of these other sports, especially football, but also in other sports that where you won't see as many cases, and therefore most cases, these federations do not have any regulations. And at that time, what is happening is they are just borrowing from whatever is available because there is no policy. Now, on one hand, you have the IOC framework, which talks about quite a few very important principles like no presumption of advantage, primacy to bodily autonomy, no harm, etc., which are all very important. But often federations which are smaller, especially, do not have the resources to have that entire very long process to policy making, and they don't have policies. So they used to look up to the IOC for some kind of guidance. Now the IOC doesn't give them a threshold anymore, like 10 nanomoles or 5 nanomoles, so they don't really know what to do. And often what happens is they borrow from World Athletics. Now, if you look at World Athletics itself, the events are sort of, there are restricted events and non-restricted events, given they don't have, even according to their scientists, clear science. So what we have seen recently, for example, in club football or in some kind of continental football tournament, they've just borrowed from here and there the thresholds. So 5 nanomoles is what World Athletics is saying. Someone in football is just applying it because FIFA doesn't say a number. So we are seeing all of these things happening, which causes even more confusion. And a lot of young athletes were impacted because of this lack of information. And there is a huge disconnect between the international federations and their member associations. And much of my work now involves member associations of international federations and educating them. Athletes often come to me asking me to speak to member associations. This is really the international federation's job, but they are not doing it. And therefore, some of us are ending up sort of doing this work, but it's a huge problem with that. There is no education, and therefore there is so much of violation of rights at the ground level.
The other thing we have to, thanks, Payoshni, the other thing we have to remember here, so when I was an athlete, we were gender tested. I won't say when. It was at a multi-event activity. And an athlete, quotations around, failed her gender test. She was put in a cast and came back to wherever we were all staying. And not my sport, different sport. And she had to fake an injury and she was sent home. She's not alive. So that was a long time ago. And several women I knew, and they just stopped competing. And nobody talked about it. I mean, kind of whispered about it. Nobody talked about it. That was in the 80s. I was 12. But and I've done a tiny little bit of research. I haven't got it all together yet, but here in the global north, we like to fix things early. And things that don't need to be fixed, right, and things that don't need medical intervention, and that's changing. But there are also athletes that quietly are being managed by sport here before it becomes a problem. So I'm doing a tiny bit I've had a few phone calls about it from the dark web. No, I'm just kidding. And so, but for women in the global South, it's public, right? Even the conversation we had, you know, with the South Africans. Here is Annet, first woman to come forward, to whistle blow and say this out loud. Like, think about that. She's taken on one of the largest. So I always describe, and then I'll stop talking. I always describe sport as like the Vatican. So the IOC is the Pope, and then all the sports federations are like the archdiocese. And so there's the archdiocese of World Athletics and field hockey and swimming, FINA, FIFA, and all that. And they have autonomy. They can do whatever they want. They could, you know, tell us all we have to dye our hair red, and we'd all, you know, dye our hair red. And they have autonomy. The only time that the IOC kind of has to do something that matters, because they don't want to be on the wrong side of history, no shit, is that when somebody in the archdiocese messes up, or they have to like fix a problem. But other than that, they have full autonomy. So what Payoshni is saying is that the IOC can have the framework. Oh, you know, inclusion, and it's all good, it's all great, yippity dippity, and it's all in writing. And the IOC says, we're not going to discriminate anymore. We're not going to have regulations. We're not going to sex test at the Olympics. But all you archdioceses, you can do whatever you want in between. So you can call them out, you can attack, you can scrutinize, you can abuse, you can assault anybody you want. So by the time that you get to the Olympics, we're not testing because you've already taken care of it for us. So yes, it's awesome that they have the framework. And Payoshni has worked tirelessly for years and years and years and years to make this all happen. Pro bono and you know, for the love of athletes. So that's what everyone needs, Payoshni Mitra on their side, really, in a conflict.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that the IOC framework, for the first time, they actually consulted athletes impacted.
Yeah.
But the IOC didn't know how to reach those athletes. So the IOC also came to me. But what I wanted to add is Annet Negesa is one of those athletes who were consulted for that framework, which is quite a groundbreaking framework as far as what it says. However, it's not binding, and therefore we have more challenges at this point. But, you know, Annet should take some credit for what you see in that framework.
I'm not saying the framework isn't awesome and important. I'm just saying we know the truth. And now you do as well.
I think Dr. Fusco is going to jump in very quickly, but then we have this very patient woman up there who would like to ask a question. Or could you go first? But Dr. Mitra needs to hear you.
Okay.
Thank you for waiting and being so patient.
It's okay. I saw this film the first time it was shown here, but the second time now, I was impacted much more the second time around because I had more time to process it. But my question, and first of all, thank you, Dr. Mitra, thank you, Phyllis, thank you, Annet, thank you, all of the athletes who had the courage against so much personal pain to let the world know what's going on. My question is to Dr. Mitra: are there not any female athletic associations, boards, agencies, union? I don't know. Like, haven't we got there yet? Is that the state of affairs with athletics? That's what I'd like to know.
That the men hold all the power.
Yeah, athlete unions could be very helpful, and I must acknowledge that World Players Association had written to the International Association for Athletics Federations on this issue as well. I'm their offices here in Switzerland, and so there have been involvement of these unions. But even if you look at, FIFPro is a great union, the football union. Is quite active even in the global south. But even if you look at history of unions in sport, one, they have been very male, and they have been very global north as well. I am aware that in South America, for example, there are athlete unions, especially football unions, working very well, etc. But it's not yet been something that you have seen across the world, and especially not in the global south. This is something that hopefully will grow, but as of now, this is not what we see. And I think it also is something which is difficult to build because of how sport is structured, how hierarchical sport is, how officials and athletes are at the bottom of the pile, obviously. And if they unite and they start speaking to each other, it's a huge threat. And how that is not encouraged in many parts of the world, as well as in Switzerland, where I am right now sitting. Obviously, unions are not appreciated by big sporting organizations.
I think there's maybe we take one more question from the audience. Woman back here. And we're getting towards the end, Anna, so maybe we want to have, after the question, we have a last say and leave the last say with Phyllis and Dr. Mitra, but let's maybe get our question.
Thank you so much for making this film. I don't think this is working, but it's okay. I can speak loud.
But Dr. Mitra needs to hear you on the microphone.
Oh, she needs to hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Is this okay? Is this working now?
Yes.
Thank you so much for making this film. I had no idea that this was even happening in our world. So, wow, I'm just really shocked sitting here. I'm also wondering, historically, when was the last time a man was tested like this? No examples of this kind. And also what I'd like to know is, what are the most recent wins that have happened around what is going on with all of this? Any recent wins that you want to share with us as far as anything at all?
I am still struggling to reach out to all the women who are impacted by these regulations. I didn't have time for men. So I really do not know. Jokes apart, I haven't heard of one. I know there was one case of an athlete I have read about. I won't like to take his name. He's a very well-known athlete who was investigated for very high level of testosterone at some point, because it was so high that there was these fears that he might have doped, but he didn't. He really had very high level of testosterone. There is apparently such a case. I cannot name him because I'm not sure how much this is in public domain, but I haven't gone out I didn't reach out to him, but I know that he is in support of inclusion. What was the next question? Sorry.
Are there any successes that you can relate that have come recently?
Well, we are waiting to hear from European Court of Human Rights, where Castor is waiting for the judgment. And I hope next time I get an opportunity to speak to you, I have some positive news on that. And I think in this overall journey over the last nearly now 15 years of my own work, and you heard Katerina Kurkazes, who's been working on this issue for several years, Professor Bruce Kadu, who I hear is not there in Toronto today, who's been a huge mentor not only to Phyllis but to me as well, and whatever we have done together. I think these alliances have been the biggest success stories. The alliances that we have been able to create across the world, among experts, among advocates, among legal counsels, media persons, and of course, most importantly, athletes. And I think those are our successes. The more, as the previous question was about union, and I think that's where the success lies, that we have been able to come together to fight these cases, to take that extra step. There's a lot more scrutiny on many of us right now, but the fact that we came together, the fact that Annet and some of the other athletes met, and it continues to speak to several of these young women who I am in touch with and am working with. I think those alliances have been the success story, and that would be my big win, if you ask for one. Apart from all the changes we have seen in the IOC framework, federations asking for consultation, and it was also consulted by World Triathlon. So those changes, but I think the alliances is our biggest win so far.
Another really huge win for everyone and for all women in sport is that when I met Payoshni, she was working, she's a professor and traveling around pro bono, helping women, providing them financial support and equipment and caring. And Payoshni is not only a director now for the what's it called? I have a concussion too. Pardon me?
Global Observatory for Gender Equality.
No, I knew that one. No, I meant the director for the athletes' rights, human rights in sport. Your board.
Their board. The Center for Sport and Human Rights.
Center for Sport and Human Rights. But UNESCO, the very, very first ever in the world CEO of the, say it, Gender Inequality for Women in Sport in the world. That's
Yay.
Payoshni. So
Right.
that's a win.
Payoshni, huge win, and too modest to say so. So you guys have been fabulous, sitting, listening to us go on. Maybe it's time to final thoughts with everyone if we can. And Dr. Fusco, you want to go first?
Sure. I think in terms of the film, that one of the things that struck me is the myth of what a level playing field is, what fair play is. These don't exist. So demystifying that through these athletes' stories is really important. It benefits racial and patriarchal systems in terms of keeping certain women out of sport and out of certain sports. I think that the corporate interests in sport depend on the idea of a level playing field and fair sport. And so, again, I think that's why these organizations, World Athletics, the IOC, continue to reap the benefits of corporate investment because of this mystification around the idea of a level playing field and fair play. And, I just wanted to echo Annette's words that enough is enough. And I think that those were really important words that she said. And I think it's important that women athletes do work together, that it benefits sexism, it benefits racism, to keep women competing against each other and not working together. And again, enough is enough.
Yeah, I'll keep it really brief because I know we're over time. But I think one of the quotations that was in the film about, this is about being human, being allowed to play, being allowed to compete is about being considered a human in terms of who decides that and who who has the right to decide who is a woman, who is human. And I hope also, you know, my work is really looking at trans athletes, and I hope that we can all bring a similar level of curiosity to that topic too, because it's also an important one. That is, yeah.
Well said. Okay, Karen.
Well, that athletes, female athletes, are not just bodies in motion. They're people, they're humans, they have psyches, they have spirits, and we have to think about that there's a human in there. It's not just about performance. It's about well-being, thinking about well-being. And I'd like to see more supports, mental health supports for young women athletes around the world. Myself.
Well, I think that, you know, when it really comes down to it, just like every other sector, the whole binary thing in sport is a myth, but it's a myth that's sacrosanct. So we're not changing anything anytime soon on that. But people ask all the time, you know, what can we do? And, you know, everyone can have my email where we have an impact campaign generated out of my bedroom office with Robin Kay and carried on with Ingrid and with Sarah. And right now, the film is a tool. We talked about it this morning. We talked about it in our conversation with South Africa. So at category Woman Doc, and if you like the film, do whatever you do on social media. I'm not on it, but I know it's very important. And say something. Say something. Just say something, because it matters. It matters. And you know what? It's time. And Payoshni came up with this amazing hashtag, all women in. Hashtag all women in. And, you know, we use the word women, and I struggle with, well, there's Annet. You went away. You're back.
Annet was there, just the view, she was not on screen.
Oh, I thought you left. Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's where I was going with. I'll give you my email. So you know what? Just have my email. Phyllis PHYLLIS.Ellis@gmail, or you can email at category. What is it, Sarah? Category Woman Doc at gmail.com. And I'd like to thank Ingrid Hamilton, who's the impact producer and from GAT PR, and Carla Rojas, and the amazing Sarah Michael for doing all of the extraordinary work to put a voice to this film in a space that I don't understand.
Annet and Dr. Mitra, we are winding up. You've been so incredible all day, and you've been so incredible all evening with us, and we thank you so much. But could we just get one last parting thought from both of you? Annet first, please, if you don't mind, and then maybe Dr. Mitra, and then we will let you go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity of being to this podium too. I think it's morning now. Yeah, what I can say is that it's not the end. We have to fight together. We fight for the human rights for women who are suffering with our regulations in different organizations there in the sports. And also I can say it's hashtag enough is enough.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
That's the best one. That's the best one. That's it. You just did. That's it. That's the hashtag. Enough is enough.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay, Dr. Mitra.
Sorry. I think I've spoken enough all evening, and I think the way Annet ended is the perfect ending. So I'll not say anything more.
Beautiful. Thank you both. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for having us and for screening. And thank you, Gretchen. And thank you for coming.
And thank you, Phyllis, for making the film.
I won't keep everyone here much longer. I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Faculty of Kinesiology and the BIPOC Varsity Association, which I'm a part of. So we just want to express our gratitude to you all for your attendance and showing your support for the screening of Category Women. The BVA, the BIPOC Varsity Association, which I'm a part of, is a collective of racialized student athletes coming together to create and implement strategies against systemic racism in athletic settings. And as a member of this student athlete advocacy group, I was personally moved by the film and able to draw like a lot of parallels within my own personal experiences. And I hope you all enjoyed it as well. We would like to extend our thanks and a lot of just heartfelt thanks to you, Phyllis, for sharing your impactful work with our community. And as a token of appreciation, we would like to present a gift to you. Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and hope to see you all at future events.